Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome. I'm going to get started. My name is Sonali. I am a senior recruiter at URL, so I would love to get to know all of you. Email me, DM me, all of the things. Today's panel is the first of our 4-part 90-day series on how to make the most of your first 90 days at a new job. Today, we're going to focus on the employees. So if you are someone who just got hired, or you just started a new role, or you just started a new job, what do you do now? How do you make those 3 months really count? Not just for the kind of success of your work and what you're producing for the place that you work at, but for yourself, right? To make sure that this is a place that you feel is sustainable for you and that you're happy at and content with. That is important to us. So we have some fantastic panelists here with us today. We have Christina Boyd, who is an organizer for Media Guild of the West and one of my favorite former coworkers. And we have Dorianne St. Fleur, who is a career and leadership coach. We are all coming to you from California today, which is exciting to me. This is going to be on the record. It's recorded. I'm putting all of our Twitter handles in the Twitter handles in the chat right now. Tweet at us, quote us, whatever. So first, Christina and Dorianne, I would love if you could tell us a little bit more about yourselves. If you could do an introduction in 1 minute or less about your work, and especially focusing on your work in relation to preparing for a new role. Dorianne, do you want to go first?
Sure. So excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me. As you mentioned, I'm a career and leadership coach. I'm also an author, and I specialize in really helping women of color, no matter where they are in their careers, really fast track their careers and get promoted faster, land amazing dream roles, and do it in a way that they're not sacrificing, their lives, their happiness, their sanity as they're doing it. And so the work that I do primarily is really about how do we understand how to make more money, how to have more impact, and how to thrive in these corporate settings. And how do we do that by hitting the ground running right from the start? So when you start a new role, whether you're transitioning to a new team, how do you hit the ground running immediately so that you're building that momentum that you need in order to fast track your success?
Amazing. It's really a bummer for me that my first 90 days ended 3 days ago. So I'm just going to pretend that it's the first 90 days for me and ask you all the questions. Christina, same question.
Yeah, so I started working full-time in the labor movement in February 2020 after being part of the organizing campaign in my own newsroom and Sonali's newsroom, the LA Times, and helping to bargain the first guild contract there in 2019. It was my first job out of college. The newsroom was owned by Tribune Publishing. So I know firsthand the newsroom industry, the journalism could be really, really hard, especially when you're starting a new job. And I also spend a lot of time now in my current job meeting with workers in non-union and union workplaces who are just trying to find their feet and make this job a long-term place that they can stay. I also want to acknowledge that, there are really enormous forces at play in journalism, capitalism, frankly, and the prioritization of profits over people. And that can make success in the news media industry really hard to find. But, over the last few years, while I've been organizing, I've found that while these larger forces are bearing down on us, we can also find some success and hopefully genuine joy at work by stepping into our own power and building power with coworkers.
I love it. So I want to start with you, Christina, from your perspective as an organizer, whether someone is going to be in a union or not. We know that in journalism, especially, but also across industries, a lot of people are unionizing. So chances are, if you're starting a journalism job, you might be in a union. But whether you are or not, what role does solidarity with coworkers play when you're starting a new job? And how do you go about building it? Like, is there an appropriate time to do it?
So I'm actually going to take a step back because yes, solidarity matters from the very beginning of the job. But I think it's also important that people know and exercise their legal rights as workers. So the first thing I think every worker should start with is memorizing Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act. Sounds very lame, but it is actually extremely important because regardless of whether you're in a union or not, Section 7 says you have the right to form a union, join a union, and engage in collective action to make your workplace better. It's called protected concerted activity, talking about your pay with new coworkers, signing a group petition to protest unsafe work. All of that is protected by the law. And if an employer tries to discourage you from talking about your pay or tries to intimidate you out of taking a group action to improve your working conditions, one, that's illegal. But two, if an employer is willing to violate your rights, that's pretty definitely not an employer that is going to set you up to succeed at your job. So I want to start there because I think it's really hard to build solidarity without knowing that you have this legal right. And then from there, I think it's all about, finding a community, not waiting for coworkers to reach out to you, but being proactive about it. Hopefully, your coworkers will reach out. If you're joining a union newsroom, a lot of unions have orientations for new coworkers. But even if they don't, or if you don't have a union in place already, reach out to someone whose work you admire on day one. Ask someone to help you learn the new expense reporting system or how to navigate your benefits. Invite a coworker to coffee and tell them just like flat out, you're new to the job and you want to get to know your peers and what they think of the company, and like be really sincere about getting to know them. Learn about their families, their pets, their hobbies, their personal lives. The things we care about in our personal lives tend to be really greatly impacted by our work. And, it's hard to have children if your company has a really limited parental leave policy, or it's hard to make time for hobbies if you're always working overtime. So when you get to know your coworkers personally, you learn a lot about the satisfaction that they have with the workplace, and you start developing these bonds that make work so much more enjoyable. Work can be really isolating, especially if you're in a remote workplace. But even if you're not, I've been in newsrooms where people sitting like right next to each other only communicate by Slack. We sit in total silence. Don't let that discourage you from getting to know your coworkers, and be really intentional about not letting yourself get isolated, because isolation breeds despair and connection breeds hope, and you need hope to be successful at work.
Oh my gosh, is that a Christina Boy original? Because that's wonderful. Thank you, Christina. That's great. I also, before we jump to Dorianne, forgot to mention we are going to take questions probably in the last 25 to 30 minutes. But please, as we're talking and as you think of a question, pop it in the Q&A function. You should see it at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So we want your questions. Submit them as you think of them. Okay, so Dorianne, that was great, Christina. Thank you. Dorianne, moving to you, I would love if you could give our attendees who are mostly either preparing for or entering new roles in media and journalism, a roadmap, like first 30 days, first 60 days, first 90 days. What are the actionable steps that people should be taking in a new role?
Yeah, so I love talking about the first 90 days, particularly because it's, I think, a time in one's career life cycle that often gets overlooked. We spend so much time trying to get the new role, the new position, land the new job. We are tweaking our resumes, we're networking, we're interviewing out the wazoo, we're doing so many things. We land the role, and then it's like, okay, let me take a deep breath. I'm here, I can relax. And I like to tell my clients that, yes, pat yourself on the back and celebrate, but it's not necessarily the time to just kind of sit back and relax. There is work that needs to be done, and how you approach the first 90 days really does help to set you up for the remainder of your career at the organization. And so the first thing I love to tell people before we even talk about what to do in the first 30, 60, 90 days is to think about what the true objective of this time period is. And I like to look at it as it's your opportunity to build credibility and momentum in your new role. So it's not that you need to be trying to overly prove yourself or try to jump through all these hoops or work yourself into burnout. That's not really the objective. You just want to say, hey, hiring manager, hiring team, you picked the right person by me coming here. Let me show you that by building the credibility and building the momentum. It's really, I think once we couch it in what it is, it kind of helps to allay some of the stress that potentially comes up. Once you're clear on what the overall objective is, then there's 3 main action items that I like to think about. The first is that you need to really think about adapting a success mindset for this process. And I like to look at that in the first 30 days. The 30 days is all about, the first 30 days is all about what is the mindset that I need to have in this new role? And I'll explain what I mean by that. But right now, just giving you kind of a high level framework. For the next action item in the 60 days is all about building a strategic network. So you've made it into this role. Potentially, you know a couple of people. Maybe you don't know anyone at the organization. Maybe even you know, connected with some past coworkers. Maybe you know some people, but it's really an opportunity to think about how can I be intentional about the people that I'm going to surround myself with? How do I build an inner circle? How do I really understand who I should be partnering with? And the third action item that takes us to the 90 days is about securing your first win. And when we talk about wins and we talk about that momentum that I talked about earlier and that credibility, it's really around people saying, okay, you've been here for 3 months, you've been here for some time. What is something that I can tangibly see that you've contributed to our organization? And so thinking strategically from day one around what the opportunities can be for you to secure your win is really important. So with those 3 action items, I'll break each one down. The first one around adapting a success mindset, it's really about creating a new mental starting point. So what I always like to tell folks is if you're coming into a new organization, it's really important that you take time to reflect on the beliefs, the stories, the narratives that you're bringing in from your past work experiences. Maybe you had a bad situation with a manager, with a colleague that left you feeling like no one really cares about the work that I do. And so I need to just put my head down and do my own thing. Now, that's valid. Maybe that's your experience. So not trying to say, you know, that never happened. But as you walk into this new environment, it's important that you learn the lessons from that past experience, but that you move forward with opening a clean slate. And so really thinking about what's the new starting point that I want to give here? What's the benefit of the doubt that I want to give to my manager, to my colleagues, to my department, to the people that I'm working with, so that I'm not bringing in some of this baggage from my old experiences into this space. Again, you want to bring the lessons, but you don't want to bring some of those negative kind of mindsets that are there. You also want to think about how can I accelerate my learning curve? So yes, I'm new and maybe I'm doing more of the same work that I've been doing, but I've never done it here. I've never done it with these people. I've never done it, you know, whatever the new variables are in this role. And so how can I accelerate the time that it takes me to get up to speed? And some ways that I love for people to think about as they want to accelerate their learning curve is about observing kind of the lay of the land, right? Looking at who are the top performers, who are the people, the movers and the shakers, who are the folks that people are coming into, and how do they interact? How do they communicate? How do they show up in meetings? What information do they share? What information do they keep to themselves? Really just being a sponge during this time and understanding what is it that you need to do in order to kind of smooth into the organization. Now, when I say this, I always like to put a caveat there to say that it's not about you just becoming a carbon copy of everyone else at the organization, right? You want to stand out. You want them to see that you're adding and contributing to the organization. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If there are things that if there are ways that people communicate, if there's shorthand that people use, if there are ways in which ways of working, ways of being that you see is working really well at the organization, it doesn't hurt to observe those things so that you can now just kind of fly into the organization and kind of just adapt. One of the best compliments that I love when I am starting at a new organization or joining a new team or doing anything is is that it feels like you've been here longer than you actually have. And because I observed and I'm using the lingo and the shorthand and I'm doing the things that I'm noticing other folks are doing. And so it really helps me to not have to learn things the hard way and not have to learn from my own mistakes necessarily, but just pay attention to what others are doing as well. And the third piece when it comes to this success mindset is around creating a strategic plan, literally sitting down and thinking about, for the next 3 months, as I think about the kind of mindset that I need to be in, what is the plan that I'm going to set for myself over these 90 days? And when we're thinking about plans and when we're thinking about what should be on the plan and what should I be thinking about, I think a good rule of thumb, and you can tweak this as it makes sense for you and in the work that you're doing. But in the first month, it's all about learning, right? So when you're thinking about your strategic plan, again, what am I learning? What am I doing? What are some developmental areas that I need? Month 2, you can have goals and action items that are related to contribution. So now that I've sat back, I've learned, I've observed, I'm now going to focus on how I can actually contribute, how I can use my skill sets to help the team. And then month 3 is around execution. So when you're creating your plan, thinking about what are the things that I'm actually going to do in order to show that I'm providing value to the team. So all of that to me rolls up in the success mindset, and that should keep you pretty busy, right? Observing, getting your mind right, reflecting, creating your plan in those first 30 days. In the next 30 days, which takes us up to 60 days, it's all about networking. I know that it's cliche at this point, but we're going to say it because it's true. It's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And I think that really lends itself to be true when we're talking about these first 90 days. As you come into the organization, potentially the only people that know you are the people who were in your interview panel. And so now it's your opportunity to kind of expand your reach and broaden your network and making sure that the right people know you. And when we think about the right people, we're thinking about that core people the people who I call your inner circle. So that would be your manager, right? You want to make sure that you're building that rapport, you're building the relationship with your manager. You also want to make sure that you are figuring out who can be your quote unquote buddies, right? And so I always, if I'm joining an organization and they don't automatically like have a process around assigning buddies, I find my own. Who's someone who I consider a peer, a colleague, someone who's on the same level as me, who's been here longer, that I can use as a sounding board, that I can ask questions to, that I can let my hair down and really say, that doesn't seem right in that meeting. Was that just me, or did you feel that as well, right? Obviously, it takes time to build that trust, but I'm on the lookout for people that there's not that much stress and tension around our relationship, so that I can really just be comfortable and ask those questions that I need to do. And then I look for people who I identify as influencers, as gatekeepers, resource keepers, as experts. I want to make sure I have these people in my circle so that I know where to go. My background, my career has been in HR, human resources, diversity, and inclusion. But even if I wasn't in HR, one of the people that I would have on my inner circle is someone in the HR team, someone on legal, someone like the teams that I need to work with. I want to make sure that I'm building an inner circle that involves those folks, so that I know who to go to and where to go when I have questions or when I'm thinking about what I need to be doing in my career. And then finally, for the last 3 months is about securing that first win. So you spent the first month really getting your mind right, creating your plan, figuring out what you want to do, what the goals are. You spent the next 30 days thinking about, who do I need to know? How do I come with these people and help me do what I need, so that they can help me do what I need to do. And then finally, now I want to take all of this information, take all of the nuggets I've learned, everything that I'm observing, and secure that first win. And it's important to think about, when you want to have a first win, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to create and innovate and create some new process that no one has ever seen before, but really just thinking about, what are the key problems that my team is tasked with solving? When I was hired, they likely talked me through it. This is my job description. This is what we're doing. And when I look at that problem, what sub-problems exist that maybe I can tackle? Maybe there's one thing that I can take under my wing, and this is what I'm going to work on. And this is how I'm going to bring about change on my team, or this is how I'm going to contribute. And so really just thinking and looking for quick wins, low-hanging fruits, easy fixes that you can complete in service of the overall goal of your organization so that you can secure that win. And you want something to speak to, you want something to say, this is a tangible deliverable that in these first 90 days, this is what I am working toward, or this is what I was able to accomplish. So I know that was a lot, but this is how I think about the first 90 days and how to really be strategic and intentional about, again, building that credibility and momentum when you first start.
That was fantastic. Thank you. I would love, Dory, and thank you folks who are asking questions. They're great, and we'll get to them really soon. Christina, I would love if you could talk a little bit about how to apply the kind of 3 steps that Dorianne just gave us to a newsroom environment. So in a lot of the folks, I think, in the room right now are going to be in a reporting capacity, and a lot of newsrooms don't have. And, you know, if you're a manager or you have a manager, tell them to tune in next month when we do a training for managers on the first 90 days. But a lot of folks, they're like, all right, your first day, let's go. Like, where are your stories? So how do you do these things in a often high stress, deadline heavy environment? For the 30 days, like, how do you create a strategic plan that builds in the realistic fact that you have to probably be doing a lot of stories, building the network, I think you talked about, but if there's anything to add there. And then for the 90 days, the way that I think about quick wins and easy fixes, especially for us as like BIPOC folks, is like, what is the low-hanging fruit? Like, can you do a source audit of your own sources? Can you model something that you do for your stories that's a process other people can use? But I'd love to get your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I have to say, I really love actually the format of this panel because it's so interesting. I feel like, Dorianne, the way that you're coming at it is about like personal success in the workplace. And the way that I'm coming at it is really complementary because it's about like making sure that the workplace is working for you. So I think a couple of things stood out to me. One about setting that success mindset. Something I've noticed a lot in my work is that a lot of times people starting new jobs in all kinds of newsrooms, people just struggle with figuring out what's expected of them. They also struggle with figuring out what they can expect from their manager. And it can be hard to know when you could be doing better or when you're being treated unfairly if you just don't know the policies and expectations that govern your working life. And I think a lot of issues that people run into with managers early on the job could be avoided if we're really proactive about establishing that relationship and that inner circle. So one thing I try to tell people when I'm first meeting them is, you know, as soon as you can, sit down with your manager and have a really clear, deliberate conversation about what the newsroom is trying to accomplish as an organization. What do they need from you personally to accomplish in the short and the medium term? What do they think will constitute success at that? And how are they going to measure your performance, right? Like, especially in newsrooms, it can be tough to say, what does success look like for a reporter, especially in the first 90 days when you're just getting to know your beat, maybe you're getting to know a new town. And I think sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, you know, my boss expects me to stay late and come in early and work unpaid overtime. And I say, did your boss actually say that to you? And the answer is often no, not directly. It's more that it's implied. They feel like their boss is suggesting this without suggesting it. And so, you know, initiate a back and forth really early on, clarify your manager's expectations. And that also gives you a chance to reset those expectations before you get too far in on the job. And you can assert your own vision at that point for what the job is going to look like. That's also a great time to do what Dorianne suggested about, you know, figuring out how people communicate. Ask your boss, how do you like to be reached? Do you want to do it by email or phone, face to face? How often should you be expecting to talk to your boss? What kind of decisions do they want to hear about from you? It can be really awkward to get 3 months into a job and feel like you either never talk to your boss, or worse, your boss is constantly hovering over you and you still don't know what they want from you. So talking really directly before you get started too far into the beat or whatever newsroom job you're doing, and set some best practices that for how the two of you interact, and use that as a foundation for checking in every few months.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Do you have any advice also on like how to get a quick win in a journalism space? And you can talk about this as like a quick win for yourself, a quick win for the company. Like, well, how do you think of a quick win in kind of the first 90 days in a newsroom setting?
So again, I think it comes back to having that initial conversation with your boss. The quickest win is going to be the win that your boss identifies for you to do. But I also think, you know, when we go into any newsroom, we know that there are stories that people just aren't covering. So paying attention to those. I recently met a reporter who told me he had been assigned on the night reporting beat, right? He covered crime and cops and the usual like general assignment, opening assignment kind of early career. But he noticed there was a huge lack of environmental stories, and that, you know, the newsroom had recently gone through a reorganization. There were a lot of beats that went unfilled. So what he did at the beginning of his shift was, before, you know, he started listening to the police scanner, he'd look around for like science stories he could do, and he'd email experts, potential sources, and say, hey, like, I work in the evenings, do you mind if we set up a call during evening hours after your regular business hours so that we can talk about this thing? And then he just started doing stories, fitting them into his regular night shift. And I think that really made him stand out. I think that kind of thing where you're looking around and you're figuring out what is the newsroom missing about the community that it's covering, or what is a beat that people really miss having that they maybe used to have and then downsized, and how can I help fill that beat?
I love that. Thank you. Well, I have a lot more questions, but I want to get to some of the audience questions because we're getting some great ones, and then we can return to mine after. And if there's anything else anyone wants, please put in your questions, and we will try to get to them. So this is a good question, especially in a remote environment, which a lot of us are still in. What do you do if you start a job but you have very little face time with your manager? So what Christina said was great, right? Ask them how they want to be communicated with. Sometimes like that you won't really get an answer. And I think that's fair. So if you don't have very much face time with your manager, do you have any tips to ask for more, but like not be in, this is in the asker's words, not be a nuisance, since they're very likely to be busy too. I don't think you're being a nuisance if you ask your manager for their time. That's their job. But Dorianne, what are your thoughts on that?
I love this question, and I'll start it with where you ended with, this is their job, right? And so part of the manager mandate, in addition to doing all the work that you need to do when you either signed on voluntarily or were told to manage other people, that means that you have to talk to them. You have to have meetings. You have to see how they're doing, et cetera. And so it's important that first there's a reframing of how this FaceTime manager meeting, check-in one-on-one, how you as the employee is seeing it. So yes, you're not a nuisance, even if they feel that way, unfortunate for them, but this is part of what I need as an employee. This is part of what you're supposed to give to me as a manager. So let's reframe it first. Second, exactly what Christina mentioned, it's really just about asking. I think a lot of times managers are kind of in their own groove. This is what they've been doing. I meet 30 minutes every 3 weeks with others. And so I'm assuming that works well for you too. This goes back to my point about a mental reset and a new starting point. What is it that you need in order to drive success in your organization? And you need to clarify that and let them know that ahead of time and set those expectations. Now, on the great side of things, your manager will be like, okay, great, will be the new schedule, this is what we'll do. And maybe if they're completely overloaded, or unfortunately this is just not one of their strong suits, and so you're not getting what you need, then it's about thinking of creative ways to still get the outcome, the objective that you're looking for, maybe with less face time. So what I mean by that is in these check-ins, these one-on-ones, these FaceTime meetings that you're having, typically it's so you can build trust and rapport. It's so that they can address roadblocks, so that you all can align on what the expectations, and you can provide status updates. If it's a case where there's not enough time to do all of these things in a frequent way, then think about other ways that you can do that. Can you share some document that gives them a log of where you are, what the deliverables are? Can you ping them with weekly roadblocks that you need them to take out of your way, and then use the limited FaceTime to do other things like build trust, rapport, etc.? Really think about how can you maximize the different channels that we have at our disposal, and not solely rely on kind of these one-on-one meetings. Again, that's a last resort though, because best practice is that you're having frequent, consistent meetings, weekly, bi-weekly, for at least 30 to 60 minutes with your boss, so that you can kind of do some of those things. So that's the best practice. But in the absence of that, try to think creatively of how you can still get what you need.
If that's not happening, gently nudge them toward our webinar next month. Christina, do you have anything to add on that?
No, that was great. I think my answer would be a little bit of a workaround, is find FaceTime with others too. It goes back to what Dorian said about making sure you have an inner circle. If you feel like you're not getting enough support from your manager, you can also find that support elsewhere in the newsroom.
That's true. Okay, the next question is from one of my mentees, Shireen. Hi, everyone. Hire Shireen. When getting a new job, this is something you touched on earlier, Christina. You might feel like you have to give it your all, right? You have to like work all the time. How do you make sure you don't? And it can be hard, right? Like, especially for those of us raised with like a really strong work ethic to prove ourselves. How do you make sure you're not overworking yourself and burning out as you're trying to do all of this in the first 90 days? Christina, you want to take that one first?
Sure. I wish I had more experience with this myself, honestly. It is only very recently in my life that I've decided to be in like a saying no more often kind of mood. But I think one thing that really helps, especially now that if you're working a remote job or you're at home a lot more, setting very clear boundaries about not necessarily the physical workspace, but setting clear boundaries about your time, at least saying, at noon, I log off for 1 hour and I make myself a very elaborate lunch so that I can't multitask and check my email while I'm cooking. Even small things like that, I think are really helpful. And also, I think it helps to check in with others about what they're working on and getting a feel for how much other people are doing. It definitely feels like in a newsroom job, you've got to give it your all and go 100% and then some. But I think talking to other coworkers and establishing that like other people are doing great work and they're not necessarily killing themselves to get it done, like that can be very affirming.
Yeah. Also, if you model that you are not going to kill yourself to get it done, like that, other people come on board. My advice for this is, like boundaries are great. And it helps to do everything that Dorian and Christina have said in terms of having a strategic plan and knowing what your job responsibilities are, because then you can do them. I would also say like, get hobbies. Like I do pottery. So when I took pottery classes, I had to go, I'd paid a lot of money. I had to go do it. Sometimes during lunch, my lunch hour, instead of making an elaborate meal, I'm lucky that I'm near a swimming pool. I will go swimming because I cannot check my phone if I'm swimming. And that's my lunch hour. So Dorian, what is your advice for that?
No, it's exactly the first part of what you said around the strategic plan helps with that. So if I know that I said that in these first 30 days, here's my task and here's what I'm doing, I'm not doing anything outside of that right now because my tunnel focus, my tunnel vision is on this. And I say that, you know, kind of jokingly, but this even goes back to kind of what Christina started off saying is it's just about making the decision. And I know that sounds like, oh, easy to say, whatever, but when you're setting that mental reset, again, when you're coming into this new space, I overworked myself in my old job, I didn't have time for my hobbies. I didn't do any other things. I'm going to decide to do it differently this time. I'm making that decision. When you make the decision, you then have to follow it up with actions that support that decision. That action will be going swimming during lunch, making that elaborate lunch, saying no when you need to. You made a commitment, you decided for yourself. And so you need to have the actions that back that up. As long as you are providing wins, you are networking with the right people, you're building a relationship with your manager, no one's gonna die if you don't work, 80 hours a week. I mean, some roles fine, but we're talking, in my knowledge, we're not talking about saving lives here, right? And so while our work is important, it is not so important that it's at the detriment of our health and our mental wellness and our well-being and all of that.
Awesome. Thank you. So we have one question, which I like a lot. So a lot of this advice is universal, which is great. If you are a senior leader in a new organization, I don't know if you mean new organization or news organization. We can say both. How would you tweak this advice? Christina, what advice do you have for senior leaders in news orgs who are starting a new job? We'll take every meaning of the word new.
So I think I would take a step back and think about all of the leaders who have been really influential in my life. Think about what you admired about those leaders and seek to emulate that. I would say that one thing about leaders that I really admire is they all universally are very intentional about making everybody feel like part of the team. And so I think maybe when you're setting your success mindset, talk with others on your team about what you're doing for yourself and how that kind of fits in with what they're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Dorianne, advice for senior leadership who are starting.
Yeah, so I'd say the first part is really all of that does apply. I think sometimes as we get more senior in our role, we begin to think that, okay, well, I've done this, I know what I'm doing, which is true. But again, we want to reset and kind of do that. So I would still be focusing on setting a plan. I would still be focusing on creating my network and what are my wins. In addition to that, as a leader, a lot of the quick wins and a lot of the work that you also want to make sure that you are mastering is around influence. It's around making sure that the people that you're networking with, the folks that are going to be in your inner circle, the people on your team, that you're able to influence, you're able to build trust and rapport so that you can influence them, influence the work that they do, influence decisions that are made. That has to be something that you're really keeping top of mind as a leader. And the other piece is around how are you managing the productivity and the deliverables of your team. And so things like getting really good at navigating your one-on-ones with your direct reports. We talked about it before from the employee point of view about not having FaceTime. As a leader, your goal should be to make sure you have FaceTime with the people that work for you, that you are. The reason why I keep saying these addressing roadblocks, building trust, because I literally did a training this morning on this stuff, so it's very fresh. But literally your job in these one-on-ones to source and address roadblocks, to build that trust and rapport, to make sure that you are talking about career development, mastering the one-on-one with your direct reports is one of the single most powerful tools you can do as a leader in the beginning to set the tone so that they're doing their work, your team is producing, you're building your network, all of these things then begin to work together. So in addition to what we talked about, adding influence and really managing the productivity and the engagement of the employees that work for you are two things that you should be focused on as well.
Awesome, thank you. I had follow-up questions and you answered them in the course of your answer. So great. Okay. This I think is really relevant. I've definitely been in this position, not at this job, which is fantastic, but in past roles. What would you suggest for people who are the only people of color in an organization and there are existing cliques that talk about things that I, the question asker, have no interest in? Fair. How do I make work friends? Dorianne, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I just want to first acknowledge that it is very challenging when you feel like you don't connect with the people that you work with. And like, they're talking about these shows that I don't watch, they're talking about these songs that I never heard of. Like, that's a real thing. I know sometimes people downplay that to say, okay, just do your job, but we're spending all of this virtual / physical time with each other. Like, can you watch the shows that I watch, please? Can we have something to talk about, right? So I want to first affirm that that is a thing, and I totally understand kind of the urgency, behind that kind of question. Honestly, and this to me, I'd say I'll start by saying that it is personality dependent. So for me, I'm completely okay with kind of barging in and kind of overtaking conversations and talking about other things because this really isn't relevant to me. I'm completely okay to say, I've never heard of that before. Have you heard about this? Or trying to find some other kind of common ground to speak about or to talk about. Typically for me, I don't necessarily share all my business at work, but I do have like some 3 or 4 core topics that I talk about. We could talk about Beyonce, we could talk about my daughter, we can talk about, travel. There's certain things. And so what are those things for you that we all as humans, talk about? We all eat food. We all, have people that we love in our lives, no matter what shape or form that looks like or whatever it is. So really just trying to hone in on what those core topics or values can be. And if all else fails, I don't know, work somewhere else with people that you can relate to. I don't know. But it is difficult. It is challenging.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Sorry to cut you off. And thank you for validating that. I think that is a really fair concern. Yeah, talk to me and we'll find you somewhere that has more people of color. That's my job. Okay, Christina, anything to add there? I think that you are very good at this. I say this because Christina and I were on a work friends group chat for a very long time that made my life bearable. So what is your advice?
I would echo everything Dorian said. And I would add too that, friends can fall in different tiers. Maybe these are just friends who you only talk to during the workday, and you're not going to hang out with them afterward, and that's okay. Therefore, you don't have to like them as much as you like, your tier 1 friends. And yes, my answer would also be it's very personality dependent. But if you just go in assuming that people like you and they want to talk about the things that you want to talk about, you just put those things out there, the conversation will change. And if it doesn't, there are always going to be things about the workplace you can talk about. You don't have to talk about your hobbies if you don't have hobbies in common. You don't have to talk about families if you don't want to talk about your family. There's find things like, I don't know, the dumb drug testing policy that you all hate, and talk about that.
Christina's advice is to organize, talk about organizing. Fantastic. Okay, so this is another anonymous question. I started a new gig in a startup and there's a ton of ambiguity and a lack of operations here. I think that's true of a lot of newsrooms as well. Anything to keep in mind for startups versus places that have HR and administrative support? Dorian?
Yeah, so my answer is twofold here. I think the first thing that I would say is to leverage outside external resources in that case. And so, the internet is a scary place, but it's also a good place to to get a lot of the information that we need. So if you don't have HR support, administrative support, Googling what are the best practices around X can be a really good place to start. So I would say kind of just researching, talking to other people who work at other organizations, understanding what they do, et cetera. So tapping into the external knowledge base that's there. And then the second part of my answer is really, this can be honestly a quick win category. So what are some things that you can create? What are some policies that you can create? I remember I've never worked in the journalism space, but I did work in a startup space where coming from like big finance, buttoned up, all of this. And I went there and I'm like, what is happening? There's no structure, there's no this, there's no that. And so I was able to then figure out for my team specifically, and I wasn't a manager, I wasn't leading anyone, but how can I contribute by adding some infrastructure, adding some process things? It was selfishly to make my life easier, but then it had the ripple effect of making my team's life easier as well. So thinking about where can you plug holes? What can you do to build that infrastructure that you're craving as well? So that would be my 2-part answer.
I love it. Christina?
I would just add that your coworkers can be resources. A few years ago, I heard from a worker at a startup who said, I got pregnant and I went to my HR department, which was just one person, and I asked them what the parental leave policy was, and they didn't have one. They had to come up with one kind of on the fly for this worker. And I think one thing that came out of that discussion was she started talking to other coworkers, and she said, you know, you're around my age, you might get pregnant one day. What kind of parental leave policy do you want to see? And it was truly like a problem turned opportunity into organizing around a policy that worked for everyone in the workplace.
Yeah, I also think in that situation, it helps to know what the rules are in your state. And in, you know, the federal laws, but also just the state by state rules of what kind of processes a new place is supposed to have, so that you can, you know, politely invoke that. Okay, general advice question. I love this one. At what point should you ask for a raise after you get a new job? Christina?
You know, I don't have a manager's perspective on this, so some people might differ. I think that at a minimum, you should ask at least once a year. I also think it helps to time your request with, you know, after you've accomplished something big that you can point to. And that may not be 90 days into the job, but it may be 6 months into the job. It's also not a terrible idea, I think, in that initial conversation that you have with your boss about setting expectations, is to talk about pay in the long term too. You know, what would help me establish a future here in the long run? What kind of things would you need to see from me in order to talk about like career development and growth and promotions?
Amazing. Jordan?
Nothing to add on that, echo that, or no. I was gonna say nothing to add, but I do have something to say. But everything that Christina said, so that's great. Additionally, really thinking about outside of monetary compensation, so follow everything Christina said, I completely agree. What are some other things that you also want to include in the conversation as well? I think a lot of times when we think of compensation, of course, the dollars and cents, what's going in my bank account, that is important. But thinking about, what do you need for work-life balance? What do you need for developmental stipends? What do you need for, you know, time off? Back to the question around, you know, overworking yourself, et cetera. Really think holistically around how you're compensated and what that means. And maybe if it's not time yet to ask for that money conversation, or there's no budget for that money, then what are some other things that will help kind of bridge the gap until that becomes available?
And when you do that, put it in writing and like a polite email after the fact. Thank you so much for discussing a plan for increasing my compensation in the next 6 months. Okay, fantastic. So please, if you have more questions, pop them in the Q&A. I have plenty to fill all of the time and more, but we want to hear yours as well. We have about 10 minutes left, and soon our Chief of Staff, Janelle, will be popping a survey poll into the chat for attendees. So we would love if you could fill it out. Tell us what you think of this panel and what you'd like to see us do in the future. So heads up that that's coming. Until then, one of the questions that we've gotten in soliciting questions prior to this is, when you start a new job, especially kind of a more public facing role, or you've had a public facing role, what's the best way to message to folks outside of your new team, or even outside of the organization, that you're here, what your new role is, like what are the ways that you can and should do that? Dorian?
So if we're talking about outside of the organization, then I think LinkedIn is a really great place to kind of give those updates and let people know what you're working on, why you're excited about it, what they can expect from you, et cetera. And then even outside of your team, if you want to let the broader organization know, I think in that first 90 days, it's really good to play up that new person status and just start having conversations with people. Hey, let's have a 15-minute, Zoom check-in. Let's do a coffee, whatever it is, just to kind of let people know that you're here. Again, this is what you can expect from me. This is what I'm really excited about.
Awesome. Christina?
Yeah, thinking about it from the newsroom perspective, if it's a newsroom job, chances are there is some way this new job overlaps with the community. So get to know community organizations, reach out to them, invite them to have a meeting with you and your team.
I want to ask you a question that I think a lot of us have faced, which is you start a new job and it's just not what you signed up for, right? You make your strategic plan. It's been 15 days or 30. And it's like you're being asked to do things that were not part of what you thought you were doing, and they're not what you want to be doing. But you're still early in the role, right? It doesn't always look great when you jump ship right away. What do you do? Like, what do you do if you start a role, it's early, and it's just not what you thought it was going to be or wanted it to be? Joanne?
So I say in order of preference, I would say the first thing would be to try to have a recalibration conversation with your manager, with whoever is kind of managing your work around what the expectations were and what the reality is turning out to be. If nothing comes from that, then I'd say going a step further and figuring out, since this team is not working, is there another team? Is there another project, another role that I could possibly be doing inside of the organization? If that doesn't work, then I'd say it's time to move on externally. And I know that there's the stigma around, well, I just got there. It's been like a month and I'm looking to do something else. I think there are very strategic and intentional ways to tap into your network, to talk to recruiters. It's all about a story to me. You can do anything in your career, and I'm not being hyperbolic by saying that. You can do anything in your career if you have a good story. And so really talking about the expectations that you have, and not bashing the organization, but this is what I was excited about. These are the things that are doing. And unfortunately, because of the change in leadership, the change in our strategic direction, we are now starting to work on this. And I don't think that's aligned with my skill set. You can make it pretty, make it nice, and talk to the recruiters and really figure out what the next step is. I don't think it's as frowned upon as you may be thinking, as long as you have the right story, you have that kind of understanding how you're bridging that gap as well. You're going to have to explain, right? And so just make sure that you have the right explanation, I think can make it be a seamless process.
That is so true about having a story. Christina, anything to add?
+1 to everything Dorian said. Media, especially, I think people job hop all the time. There may have been a stigma around it, but I think now, especially now during the pandemic, people are much more used to seeing people job hop after pretty short periods. The only other thing I would add is, again, talk to your coworkers. This is universal to literally any problem you're having at work, is ask your coworkers if they've had the same problem, figure out whether it's universal and widely felt, because that tells you, is it a you problem or is it an organizational problem? And if it's organizational, then you can all work together to address it and find ways to kind of to have each other's backs in addressing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to the person who said that the subscription link we put is not working. I put in a new one, so that's the link to subscribe. We have another question, which is great. What is the number one thing not to do at a new job? I love this question. Thank you, whoever asked it. Wish I had thought of it myself. Christina.
Okay, I saw that question pop up and I thought about it and I couldn't come up with anything that would get you in trouble at work. Largely, I think people are pretty forgivable in the first few days. I guess I would say, don't isolate yourself. The number one thing is, do not put your head down and think that the only thing that's going to make this work is if you are a little worker bee who never raises your hand and never makes waves or anything like that. Don't be afraid of making waves. Don't be afraid of reaching out to coworkers.
I love it. Dorian?
I'd say don't psych yourself out of the opportunity. I think a lot of times we think, this it's all riding on this. I got this opportunity to pay me all this money, or this is a big whatever it is, and then we just kind of sabotage the work that we're doing. We overthink. We become prisoners to imposter syndrome, whatever it is. And so, really, just allow this to be a clean slate for you. They hired you for a reason because they feel like you can do the work that they're looking to get done. And so, just approach it with that mindset. I think is what I would say.
That's great. Well, I want to go back, Dorianne, to one of the things you said earlier in the conversation that really stuck with me, which was the mindset with which to go into a new role. A lot of folks from underrepresented groups have horrible experiences that do shape the way that we come into a new job, even if the intentions of the people at the new job and the actions are positive. So when you're coaching people, how do you help them leave go in with the lessons, but not with the parts that will affect you and your work negatively, while validating that those are real and those are terrible, and acknowledging that, but making it a positive experience moving forward? How do you do that?
Yep. So 2 things. The first is what you do before you even get into the new role. There's something that I call your dream job profile, and DREAM is an acronym. The D stands for development, the R for relationships, the E for environment, the A for acknowledgement, the M for money. Before you say, yes, I will work at your new organization, think about what you need in each of those pillars, and really think about what is it that I need for my development? What kinds of relationships do I need to have? And as you're going through your interview process, be on the lookout for anything, any red flags, any yellow flags that are going to show you that this might be a little bit more of the same of what I was dealing with before. And so really trying to minimize walking into a similar kind of culture, the similar type of situation is the first thing I would say to really prep ahead of time. I talk a lot about this in my podcast. Deeper Than Work is the podcast. It's episode 23. I break down this dream job profile and really think about what to think about before you get into the role. Once you get into the role, if you've done this, you've asked the right questions, you've looked at the red flags, you've done all the things, and you feel like, while I can't know this organization 100%, I do feel confident that they're going to be, it's a clean slate and I'm not walking into the same thing, then you want to just give folks the benefit of the doubt. And so what I mean by that is, if a situation arises, if something is triggering, really take the moment to ask yourself, what story am I telling myself? That question changes the game for me so many times. When I think I'm telling myself that they don't like me because I'm Black, or because I'm young, or because I'm a mom, or whatever it is, what evidence do I have that this is true in this situation? Is this serving me? I really just go through and ask myself these questions. Sometimes it's just my own baggage that's rearing its ugly head and it's not what it is. Sometimes it is. And so I need to have a conversation, but really think about the story, the narrative you're telling yourself, and really try to reframe so that you're not putting someone else's face on this new person's face and kind of reacting from that standpoint.
Awesome. We are at time, but I want to confirm DREAM stands for development, relationships, environment, acknowledgement, money. That's
correct.
Okay, awesome. So that is the last question. The other questions are from my dad. Thank you. I will call you. Thank you all for joining us. This is fantastic. Please sign up for a career newsletter, follow all of us on all of the social medias, and join us, or tell your managers to join us next month for the next part of this series. And thank you so much, Dorianne and Christina, for being with us. This has been fantastic, and I know I've learned a lot.
It was super fun.
Me.
Okay, thank you. Bye, everyone.